Hi everyone! In this video I'm going to be talking about verbal communication, which of course is one of the fundamental ways that we can communicate with other people. It's also one of the fundamental ways that we communicate who we are to the world, and it's also one of the most fundamental ways that we actually create the worlds that we live in. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. The nature of verbal communication is that it is defined very broadly and simply by the use of language. And language is not neutral and it can never fully represent reality. And that's why we say that language actually creates our worlds. When we select specific words to use and we choose specific ways of framing those words, or we show it in a particular way, we actually create our understanding of the world. And not only that, but we can actually create specific material conditions for groups of people or even for ourselves. Language is symbolic, it's governed by rules, it's flexible, cultural, and it evolves over time. And in that way, it's not something that simply reflects reality, but it's something that we can use to shape the world that we want to see or that we want to live in specific ways. Now, we'll start with the notion that language is symbolic. Symbols are arbitrary, meaning that they have an arbitrary relationship to that which they represent. So the example is if I have a picture of a lion, that has a very direct relationship to what it represents. And the relationship is it looks like a lion. A picture of a lion looks like a lion. But the word lion is a symbolic sign, and that means that we could have chosen to represent a lion with the word tree, but we didn't. We chose the word lion to mean the four-legged animal with a tail and a big mane. But the relationship between the word lion and the actual thing that it represents, the animal, is arbitrary. There's no direct connection. The word lion doesn't look like a lion. So that's one of the fundamental characteristics of language. It's also governed by rules that we've all kind of agreed on. There's also no direct connection between these rules and any kind of objective reality, but we've defined them, defined and created specific rules. So grammatic rules, regulative rules govern how we use language, and constitutive rules define word meaning. But language is also very flexible, and it's also defined by culture. And it's flexible in that we often bend the rules of language. We use personal idioms or personal slogans, and it's also defined a lot by the context in which it's used, as well as historically it can change over time, which I'll get into here more in a minute. It is also defined by where you live in the country. The word soda or soda pop or Coke, what you use to describe the fizzy beverage in your cup, is going to change depending on where you come from. And it evolves. And that's what I mean in terms of history. Language is constantly changing and being shaped by culture. New words are added, like the word tweet. Words change their meaning, such as the word queer. Used to be a very, very derogative word, and now it's definitely been reappropriated to mean different things. And even regulatory rules change, so they, used as a singular pronoun rather than the gendered he, is something that has sort of evolved over time. And verbal communication absolutely has a variety of different functions. It can help us share meaning, shape our thoughts about the world. It can help name things, which is really actually a fundamental way that we feel like we're individuals and we feel as though we're respected through our names. Performing actions, when we get married, for example, when the pastor says, I thee wed, or when you sign the marriage document, if it wasn't a religious ceremony, these kind of acts actually create what they do. So they're performing. Crafting conversations, of course, is a fundamental way that we use verbal communication, and it also helps us manage relationships. Now, whether that management is, I want to be in this relationship, or please help get me out of this relationship, we're still using language in order to manage it in some way. So I wanted to go through just a few of those different functions of verbal communication, but you'll want to read more about these in your textbook. In terms of shared meaning, there's two different types of meaning that verbal communication has. And there's a denotative meaning, which is the literal meaning of a word, and then there's the connotative meaning, which is the cultural meaning. If we go back to our example of the lion, the denotative meaning is a four-legged animal with mane, whereas the connotative meaning is going to be strength, courage, king of the jungle, even masculinity, right? King of the jungle, not queen of the jungle, right? So there's all these connotations that we have. And these connotations with language actually are very, very important to structuring our understandings about other groups of people, ourselves, our countries, our communities. So it's really, really important. And that's why it helps to shape our thoughts. If you look in your textbook on page 185 concerning the word hero, there's many other examples of words that sort of shape sexist, heteronormative, racist ideologies in our culture, and a lot of these things are perpetuated through language. And then naming. Naming is really as I said, one of the fundamental ways that we signify as people, and it can be very, very detrimental if we label things incorrectly or in ways that are not respectful of how people would want to be labeled. So if we label someone an illegal alien, for example, that's going to cause a much different treatment, a material treatment and condition in the world for those people than if we call someone an immigrant. So those two words have dramatically different forces, we could say, in the world. And in that way, language doesn't just reflect reality, it actually creates reality. So those were some of the major functions of language that I wanted to cover. But I also wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the gendered dimensions of language, as well as the barriers to cooperative communication in this video. So the gendered dimensions of language, research really indicates that men and women are much more similar than they are different in how they use communication. But women do use more vague and wordy verbal communication than men do. Sitcoms and most pop culture are inaccurate in their presentation of gendered communication. A lot of times we tend to think that women talk more, when in fact men actually talk more, but women might use more language to describe a particular situation. So women don't talk more on average than men, but they're going to use a more descriptive language or more vague language in order to describe a particular thing. And then barriers to cooperative communication apprehension, which is an anxiety associated with interaction. Defensive communication is a big one, which is really just impolite messages delivered in response to suggestions or criticism. Verbal aggression, which is attacking other people's self-concepts rather than their positions. This is called an ad hominem fallacy. And deception, which of course just occurs when people are trying to deceive another person. And that just comes down to issues of ethics. So that's all I'll talk about from this chapter, but definitely go back to your book and make sure there's a lot here, so I couldn't cover it all, but do make sure you go back to looking at the specifics of the different functions of verbal communication, and that's all for this week. All right, thanks.